Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Ali. I'm a doctor based in the UK, and in this video, we're talking about 5 quotes from Stoicism that changed my life and that changed the life of my friend Sam. Sam, do you wanna say hello?
Hi everyone, I'm Sam, the Stoic teacher. I'm a philosophy and theology graduate from Cambridge, where I met Ali, and I now have the pleasure of teaching philosophy and religious studies in South London.
And very excitingly, Sam and I have just released a SkillShare class about Stoicism, where we talk about the 5 fundamental principles of Stoicism and then 5 different domains in which we've applied it historically to our lives to make ourselves happier, healthier, more productive, and just more tranquil overall. So that'll be linked in the video description if you fancy checking it out. But in this video, we are talking through 5 quotes and relating them to the fundamental principles of Stoicism and how kind of they've helped us in our lives.
The first quote is from Epictetus. Epictetus says, "Happiness begins with a clear principle. Some things are within our control and others are not." This is the fundamental idea at the core of Stoicism, and we call it the dichotomy of control.
Yeah, this is like the main thing in Stoicism. It's basically this idea. You know, some things are within our control, some things aren't. And it kind of relates to the serenity prayer, which is something that I think about a lot, which is, God grant me the serenity to accept that which I cannot change, the courage to change what I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Got it in one. It's just like the fundamental principle. So how have you applied that to your life?
I mean, I like to call this one the IKEA principle on my page. This quote came to mind when I went shopping in IKEA and I was trying to walk around and it took so long to get around. I had people kind of running into me, bumping into me. And I remembered that Epictetus talks about this idea because fundamentally, if I choose to focus on the elements of a situation outside of my control, how someone's choosing to run around, then I'm going to be unhappy. If I focus on what I'm doing, then I'm able to move forward with tranquility. And of course, it has much larger and wider applications.
When you're a YouTuber, naturally, when you open the YouTube app, the first thing you see is the analytics. You see how well your video is performing relative to other videos that you've released. And we all have that thing where, you know, if you get a video that's 10 out of 10, which means it's the 10th worst performing video out of your last 10, we all kind of go, oh, crap, you know, my life is basically over. People have realized I'm an imposter. My YouTube channel's gonna go down the drain. I'm gonna end up homeless. We kind of go into this spiral of depression almost as soon as you look at the analytics. And anytime I find myself feeling in that kind of thought process, I think about this quote from Epictetus that, you know, there's stuff within our control and stuff that isn't. And so when it comes to YouTube and kind of anything that I do online, the way I think about it is that the only thing within my control is the fact that I'm putting these videos out. So we try and do 2 or 3 videos a week. That's within my control and the control of my team because we can basically put out as many videos as we want. But then the response to those videos is something that is completely outside of my control. How many people watch it, how many people like and subscribe, how many people smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm, how many people check out our SkillShare class. You know, all of these things are completely outside of my control. And therefore, I don't like the idea of having kind of like a numerical goal, like, oh, 1 million subscribers by 20, look, you know, all of that kind of stuff, it's all reliant on externalities, it's reliance on things outside of our control, and it's just a recipe for unhappiness and the disturbance of tranquility.
It's so funny to me because this quote was the fundamental driving force behind my Stoic weight loss journey. As Ali will remember, when we were at university, I was very overweight. And in fact, I discovered Stoicism at a very low point in my life where I'd got to over 322 pounds of weight. Finding the philosophy of Stoicism allowed me to, rather than worrying about the comments people would make about me or what people would think about me, to focus on what I was doing. What is it that I could do to change my life? And over the last 3 years, I managed to lose over 140 pounds of weight. And Ali and I are gonna go to the gym in a second, aren't we?
We are, as soon as we finish this video. Okay, so quote number 2 that is absolutely life-changing is another one from our friend Epictetus, and he says that it is not events that disturb people, it is their judgments concerning them. And this is just so important. This is another one of the key principles of Stoicism, Stoicism with a big S. And it's the idea that, yeah, like, we often think that our negative emotions are caused by external events. But what Stoicism says is that actually it's the story that we have told ourselves about that event that causes us to feel bad. And there's an example that often comes to my mind. It's like imagine the scenario where a friend has had some kind of birthday party, like a really close friend, and hasn't invited you to the party. And you know they've had the birthday party and you know they haven't invited you. You're gonna feel really, really bad about it. You're gonna be like, oh damn, you know, I'm not the right friend. Is the person being mean to me? What's going on? And you're gonna feel terrible about it. But then let's say, you know, a few hours later, you find out that actually the reason the friend didn't invite you was because the party was canceled because they're like, grandma died, or you know, something like that. You know that there was an external event that caused that, and therefore the story that you're telling yourself about the event has changed, and you immediately feel better. It's like the event still happened, the friend didn't invite you to their birthday, but because the story you're telling yourself around it has changed, there's now seemingly a good reason for it, it just immediately takes that load off our shoulders. And we can all imagine that applying to that specific scenario, but actually we can apply this so much more broadly than just those specific scenarios. And that's one of the things I love about Stoicism.
I mean, Ali, that example is so fantastic because what it fundamentally shows us is that we're choosing the way that we respond to something. And it's a real hack, isn't it? Because once you figure out that actually we can change how we're thinking about something, this can then be applied across the board. Matt Van Natter of the Good Fortune podcast gives the example of him sitting at a bar and hearing a really obnoxious group on the other side of the room and thinking, oh, what are these guys doing? They're so annoying. Like, I'm trying to read. I don't know why he reads at a bar. He talks about themselves. Why are they making so much noise looking over? You know, the people that are giving you a little passive aggressive stare, like, be quiet.
Those people, yeah.
And then the bartender said to him, oh, those guys are celebrating an engagement party. They're having a really good time. And in his head, he thought, oh, that's really sweet. That's really nice. And suddenly he didn't care. He could genuinely read now, whereas he couldn't even look down. He couldn't focus on the words before at all. And he realized he was choosing based on his judgment. That person's trying to be hostile and trying to disturb me. As soon as he changed that, he was able to move forward.
Yeah, and related to that, there's another quote that I like, which is that in between stimulus and response, there is a gap, and in that gap, we can choose our response. And this is like a thing in Stoicism, that the only two things within our control are our own thoughts and our own actions, and we can choose to change the story that we're telling ourselves about things. And this applies so often from things like anger to relationships to stress to dealing with comments online, like all of this stuff, more of which that we talk about in our SkillShare class, link in the video description. All of that is based around this idea that actually we can just change the story that we tell ourselves about stuff.
The last point I'd add is there is an involuntary response initially that the Stoics talk about in the technical language as proto-passions. The idea that there can be an involuntary response initially if there was a really loud noise outside right now. Me and Ali would be like,
yeah.
Oh my, what just happened? But then we would then have the opportunity to then realize, okay, what narrative are we telling ourselves? Is that now some kind of fatal noise outside? Or logically, are we able to reason and tell ourselves the story that it's probably just a lawnmower?
Yeah, and this kind of definitely comes into place when we think about our response to anger. Like, there's not much we can do about the initial flash of anger that we feel if someone does something that particularly, triggers us. But like after that first flash, after that first proto-passion, everything else, like the sustained anger that we then either feel or don't feel, is entirely based on us telling ourselves the story about it and saying that, oh, that person did that thing, they shouldn't have done that thing, I expect them to behave in that way, therefore the fact they didn't behave in that way means that they're a bad person, means that I'm choosing to be angry at them, and it's all just a story. And what Stoicism teaches us is that the more we practice this, the more we can just accept things as they are and change the story we tell ourselves.
You can choose to accept it or resent it. Quote number 3 comes to us from Seneca, and he says, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. And this is those ones where you read it and it just hits you right in the chest because you think, my God, it's really, really true. I saw this with a meme where there was a man, he looked like he was drowning. And then in the second shot, you saw he was actually just sitting on the floor with his face just above the water. I don't think you can have it flash up. And so, when I saw this, I thought this is so true because I was caught in a web of constantly overthinking. Back when I weighed over 322 pounds, I would regularly be very, very anxious about how people are viewing me, how people are going to think about me. The moment I would be introduced to someone, in my head I would think they're just going to think I'm a really fat person. And I just felt really, really insecure, and it led to me actually being really unhappy and led to me overeating due to my emotions as well, which then accelerated the weight gain. And finding this idea, which has been applied in kind of cognitive behavioral therapy in modern times, inspired by Stoicism, has been absolutely wonderful. When I interviewed Donald Robertson, esteemed author on Stoicism and cognitive behavioral therapist, he likened this to exposure therapy. For example, say someone has a cat phobia. You can either avoid cats altogether, or you could put the patient in a room with some cute little fluffy kittens, and they might, after a couple minutes, realize these kittens aren't quite so bad. So this quote leads to this idea that we potentially want to put ourselves into difficult situations because once we go into them, we might realize it's not so bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much stuff in kind of the modern productivity playbook that's so relevant to this. You guys might be familiar with the Yes Theory YouTube channel. It's amazing, link in the video description. And their whole mantra is seek discomfort. It's about this idea that when we step outside of our comfort zone, we realize that actually life is much better and it's actually not so bad. My friend Noah Kagan talks about this thing called the coffee challenge, which I think Tim Ferriss references in the 4 Hour Workweek as well. And that's the idea that, next time you're ordering coffee from like a Starbucks or whatever, challenge yourself to just ask for 10% off and just see what happens. And that, like, even thinking about that now kind of gives me palpitations, and like I'm actually sweating just like imagining that circumstance. But this is the perfect illustration that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Like, I've never done this. I've never brought myself to actually ask for 10% off. But people who've done it say that, yeah, I did it and it wasn't so bad. Equally, something like, going up to a pretty girl and talking to them. Like, we suffer so much in imagination, and actually in reality, it's not so bad. And this suffering in imagination is a big part of why we don't do the things that we want to do. Like, I get so many messages from people wanting to start YouTube channels and really, I'm really worried. What are my friends going to think? What is an employer going to think in 20 years time if like society's like morals change and things happen? Yeah. Or like, what about if I get mean comments? I'm not sure how I'd handle that. And starting a YouTube channel is a life-changing thing. And if we just allow ourselves to suffer in imagination without even trying it, it's just going to hold us back from doing all of the things and living our best lives.
Like Joe Rogan says, do stuff that's difficult, right? This feeds perfectly into the idea of voluntary discomfort. We all say it now, do stuff that's difficult, right? Chase adversity. 2,000 years ago, the Stoics were saying this concept of voluntary discomfort, this idea that we actually want to put ourselves into difficult situations. Like, for example, having a cold shower, sleeping on a hard surface. This prepares us for in future, if we were to be in difficult situations, we'd think, I faced this before, I can face it again.
Okay, quote number 4 comes from Seneca, and Seneca says, if you would not have a man flinch when the crisis comes, train him before it comes. And this kind of relates to this idea of voluntary discomfort. There's lots of concrete examples of this in real life. For example, in medicine, the reason we have so many simulation classes and courses and events is that, when a cardiac arrest happens and you're in extremis, you're in this emergency situation, you don't want to train people then. You want to train people before that happens on like a simulated scenario, because when it happens in real life, you want to be prepared for it. You don't want to be like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing. And equally, the Stoics had this idea more mentally about premeditating adversity. And that's the idea that we should prepare ourselves for worst case scenarios just so that we're prepared when they do come, and also so that we feel more gratitude. So like one example of this is something that Epictetus used to say, which is that when you're kissing your daughter or your wife goodnight, I don't know why all these examples are related to men, but hey, he says, when you're kissing your daughter or your wife goodnight, remind yourself that they might die overnight, or words to that effect. And that's not like a morbid thing. It's not like a weird person who's just like fixated on the mortality of their loved ones. Instead, it's someone who reminds themselves that actually, this is fleeting. My wife and daughter could be taken away from me at any moment. And therefore, A, I should enjoy the time I have more with them. Like, I should be grateful for that time. And secondly, we shouldn't let trivial things like, my wife left the milk out on the kitchen counter, from affecting our tranquility, because we're reminding ourselves that this too might end.
And this is often likened to one of Aesop's fables. There's a boar, and he's sharpening his tusk on a tree, and some other animal comes over to him, and he says, why are you sharpening your tusk? There's no predator coming. Like, what are you doing? And he's like, when the predator comes, the last thing I'm going to be doing is sharpening my tusks. I need to be ready. And this was the idea of premeditating adversity, whereas voluntary discomfort is kind of the physical manifestation. Premeditating adversity is very much kind of psychologically preparing ourselves. Ali used that wonderful quote from Epictetus about fundamentally remembering the mortality of our loved ones. And similarly, this could be applied on a less serious level, say, to romantic relationships. People often ask, how would a Stoic deal with a breakup? Well, they'd be upset as well, but what they would have done is they probably would have premeditated that this is possible. It is possible that this person could want to leave me at some point. And what they would have done is they would have meditated upon it, and then if it were to happen, they would be in a better position, as Seneca says in this quote, when the crisis comes, as the ball would be, and therefore they'll be able to deal with it in a way where they can protect their tranquility. And the final quote, and this is one of my favorites, comes from Epictetus. He says, when you are alone, you should call this condition tranquility and freedom. When you are with many, you shouldn't call it a crowd or trouble or uneasiness, but festival and company, and contentedly accept it. Now, this is such a wonderful idea, and of course goes back to this dichotomy of control, but really focuses on acceptance, right? When an event happens, you have a couple of choices. You can either accept it or you can resent it. Now, the path of acceptance is what leads to happiness. Epictetus would often talk about the Olympics. Before he was going out to like a busy area, he would say, I'm not going to go to the stadium and expect no one to barge me. You're going to a really built up area. Of course, at some point, like in IKEA, a little kid's gonna run into you because they're playing around. Now, if you're in the mindset that, no, I want everything to be tranquil, and you're going to a really noisy place, you've basically set yourself up for unhappiness. You need to prepare yourself. Okay, I'm going into a crowd. Something like this is gonna happen. Equally, when you're alone, the idea is that you can kind of reframe your thoughts and view it as, okay, this is my time to have some tranquility, to reflect, to maybe work on something productive. And so it's such a powerful tool for accepting situations as they are, because once you accept something, you can then constructively move forward.
And I think what's amazing about the Stoicism stuff is that these guys were writing about this stuff 2,000 years ago, and yet it still forms the bedrock of most of the modern day productivity or life advice that we're so used to seeing. So if you enjoyed this video and you want to hear more about Sam and my thoughts about Stoicism, we've got the SkillShare class, link in the video description. You can sign up for free for a 2-month trial of SkillShare, and then at the end of the trial, you can either cancel if you want, or you can continue. It's like less than $10 a month. But either way, you can check out that class. And I've got like a load of other classes on Skillshare about productivity and studying and Anki flashcards and how to edit videos exactly like this one. But in our Stoicism class, we talk about how we apply Stoicism to modern day life with the 5 fundamental principles of Stoicism, and then 5 different areas in which we apply those principles specifically. So thank you very much for watching. Sam, any plugs you'd like to give?
Yes, please. Do come and subscribe to The Stoic Teacher on YouTube. I'll be posting weekly videos about Stoicism and daily quotes on my Instagram and Facebook pages. That's The Stoic Teacher. It would be lovely to have you. I'll be providing ancient wisdom for modern times.
Ancient wisdom for modern times. That's a nice tagline. So links in the video description to all of that. Check out our Skillshare class. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.